Friedrich Hayek's great political revolution was to show that liberty is not only morally right, but intellectually necessary. In his view, the decisive facts of economic and social life are dispersed among countless individuals and never exist in concentrated form for any planner or ruling mind. That means a free society cannot be replaced by centralized direction without blinding itself. Prices, private property, contract, and the rule of law are not bourgeois ornaments. They are the institutions that allow human beings to coordinate their plans, using knowledge no authority could ever fully possess. Hayek therefore defines liberty as the condition in which coercion is reduced as much as possible, so that people can pursue plans of their own rather than serve another's ends. Freedom is not chaos, it is life under general, equal, predictable rules instead of commands aimed at particular outcomes. And that is why Hayek sees socialism, planning, and the pursuit of social justice through state distribution as so dangerous. They require powers of knowledge and powers of control that no government can wield without destroying the very freedom and spontaneous order on which civilization depends. Locke asks where rights come from. Spooner asks whether the state has real consent. Hayek asks how a free society can actually function, coordinate, and remain free without collapsing into centralized control. Hayek's great insight is that freedom is not just morally right, it is epistemically necessary. A free society is not merely fairer to the individual, it is also the only system capable of using the scattered knowledge held by millions of separate people. That is why he thinks liberty, private property, contract, prices, and the rule of law are not arbitrary bourgeois preferences. They are the institutional conditions that let civilization work. Hayek's political philosophy begins from a brutal limitation. No central mind knows enough to run society. The facts that matter most in economic and social life are dispersed, local, changing, practical, and often known only to particular individuals on the spot. Because knowledge is fragmented, society cannot be successfully organized as though it were a single brain directing a single body. That is why free institutions matter. They allow millions of people to coordinate without any one ruler understanding the whole. Hayek's defense of liberty is not just that freedom is morally noble. It is that coercive central direction is intellectually overconfident and structurally blind. He is fighting the idea that society can be consciously designed from above for equality, justice, security, or rational efficiency. He thinks that ambition contains a fatal conceit, the belief that rulers, planners, experts, or majorities can know enough to allocate life better than the decentralized choices of free individuals. Freedom is valuable not only because the individual has dignity, but because nobody already knows in advance who has the right knowledge, what opportunities matter, what experiments will work, or what ways of life will prove fruitful. A free society leaves room for discovery. Coercive planning shuts discovery down. That is what makes Hayek different from both Locke and Spooner. He is less likely to begin with, "You own yourself," and more likely to begin with, "Civilization depends on institutions that no one mind can replace." But the conclusion still strongly favors liberty. What is new in Hyack? 1. The real problem of society is the use of dispersed knowledge. In the use of knowledge in society, Hayek says the central economic problem is not merely allocating resources already given to one mind. The real problem is that knowledge is dispersed among many people and is never concentrated in a single authority. Society therefore needs institutions that can make use of knowledge that no one possesses in total. That is an enormous move, because it shifts the debate away from who has good intentions toward who could possibly know enough. And Hayek's answer is that no planner does. 2. Prices are information, not just money tags for Hayek. The price system is a communication system. Prices convey compressed signals about scarcity, opportunity, demand, and trade-offs. People do not need omniscience. They only need to respond to signals that summarize changes elsewhere in society. The market is therefore not just a place where greed happens. It is a mechanism for coordinating dispersed knowledge. The market is not magic. It is a knowledge network. 3. Liberty matters because coercion destroys personal agency. In the Constitution of Liberty, Hayek defines liberty as the condition in which coercion of some by others is reduced as much as is possible in society. He also says coercion is evil because it forces a person to serve the ends of another instead of pursuing a plan of his own. That is the moral core. Freedom matters because a human being is supposed to live by his own plans, not as an instrument of another will. So even though Hyack is less natural rights sounding than Locke or Spooner, he is still very much defending the individual against domination. 4. Freedom is not anarchy, it is life, under known general rules. Hyack is explicit that liberty is compatible with law. In fact, liberty requires law, but law of a certain kind, general, abstract, predictable rules, rather than commands aimed at particular people or outcomes. He argues that coercive government must be bound by general rules and independent courts, and that arbitrary discretion is the opposite of the rule of law. Hyack does not oppose government. He opposes government by arbitrary direction. 5. Equality before the law is the only equality compatible with liberty. Hyack is blunt that equality of the general rules of law and conduct is the only kind of equality conducive to liberty. He argues that liberty is compatible with and often productive of unequal outcomes, because freedom lets people use their abilities differently and produce different results. This is in sharp contrast. Equality before law is liberal. Equality of results is coercive and anti-liberal. Hyack thinks once government aims at equalizing concrete outcomes, it must abandon general rules and start treating people differently on purpose. That means discretion, favoritism, and growing power. 6. The rule of law protects liberty by depersonalizing power. Hyack argues that the rule of law means officials themselves are bound by prior rules, not free to improvise coercion case by case. He says the executive must be constrained in how and when it uses coercion, and that general and equal laws are the best protection against the infringement of liberty. That means the citizen should not live at the mercy of administrators, experts, boards, commissions, or ministers who can adjust outcomes whenever they want. The more personal discretion power has, the less free the individual is. 7. Spontaneous order is the answer to the planner's fantasy. Hyack's idea of spontaneous order is central. Many beneficial social orders are not designed by any one mind. Language, law, trade, prices, and many stable practices emerge through human action without being the product of a single human design. The point of liberal institutions is therefore not to replace spontaneous coordination with command, but to let spontaneous forces work as beneficially as possible. Order does not always come from someone being in charge. Often the deepest order is the order nobody designed. 8. The planner's problem is not bad motives, it is impossible knowledge. Hyack's attack on socialism is deeper than socialists are evil. His point is that central planning presupposes knowledge no planner can possess. A planner would need to know countless changing local facts, personal preferences, opportunity costs, and tacit judgments that are never all present in one place. That is why planned economies are not merely unjust, they are blind. This is where Hyack is strongest against socialism. It is not only morally dangerous, but cognitively arrogant. 9. Economic control becomes control over life. Hayek's broader political argument, especially in The Road to Serfdom, is that large-scale economic planning cannot stay confined to the economy. Once the state directs production, distribution, employment, and allocation, it is necessarily deciding whose ends matter, which lifestyles get resources, which occupations expand, and what sacrifices different groups must bear. The struggle stops being technical and becomes political coercion over ways of life. That is the road to serfdom logic. Economic control is never just about things. It is always about whose purposes will rule. 10. Social justice becomes a warrant for endless power. Hayek is deeply skeptical of social justice as a governing ideal. He argues that once the state is asked to make concrete distributions fair, it must be given broad discretion to control outcomes person by person and group by group. The result is not neutral justice, but politicized allocation. University of Chicago's description of the mirage of social justice summarizes Hayek's own argument that the pursuit of social justice erodes personal liberty and encourages totalitarianism. Hayek thinks social justice sounds moral, but in practice it requires the state to stop being a referee and start becoming a distributor of life chances. 11. Democracy itself needs limits. Hayek is not anti-democracy in the simple sense, but he does not worship majority rule. In law, legislation, and liberty, he worries about the miscarriage of the democratic ideal, the need for a division of democratic powers, and the containment of power and the dethronement of politics. So democracy is a method, not a god. If unlimited majorities can direct everything, liberty disappears just as surely as under an autocrat. General rules must restrain democratic power too. 12. Hayek rejects scientism and politics. In his Nobel lecture, Hayek warns against the pretense of knowledge, and the scientific habit of treating society as though it could be controlled like a laboratory system. He links major policy errors to economists' tendency to imitate the methods of physical science, where the underlying complexity of social life makes such precision impossible. That means one of his deepest enemies is not only socialism, but technocratic hubris. The people who think they can scientifically optimize society are often the most dangerous, precisely because they confuse abstraction with mastery. How Hyack attacks the older and collectivist moral world. Hyack is fighting the idea that society is like an army, a household, or a workshop that can be consciously arranged toward one common purpose. He thinks that image is false. A free society is not a single project. It is a framework within which millions of people pursue unknown and often incompatible ends under common rules. So the old and collectivist mindset says that society has a purpose. Rulers can identify it. Individuals must be fitted into it, and distribution can be morally corrected from above. Hyack says no, society is too complex, knowledge too dispersed, purposes too various. The political order should therefore not try to command the ends of individuals. It should provide rules within which they can pursue their own ends. The old mindset says, what should society make people do? Hyack says, what rules? Let free people coordinate without anyone ruling the whole. Freedom versus security. Hyack does not say all security is bad. In the Constitution of Liberty, he explicitly allows a minimum floor of sustenance, some role for social insurance, education, and provision for those unable to look after themselves, provided the methods do not destroy liberty. So Hyack is not a no-state-ever thinker, but his core point is that security must not become a license for arbitrary control. Once security means guaranteeing particular outcomes to particular people, the state must discriminate, direct, manage, and override general rules. That is where freedom starts dying. Hyack does not reject security. He rejects security purchased by replacing general rules with administrative control. Why Hyack is not an anarchist. This is one of the biggest differences from Spooner. Hyack absolutely thinks government has necessary functions. He is not arguing for no law, no courts, no enforcement, no public institutions. He thinks liberty requires a legal framework, stable rules, contract enforcement, property rules, and institutions that restrain coercion. He also explicitly says the argument for liberty is not an argument against organization, but against exclusive, privileged, monopolistic organization and the use of coercion to block others from doing better. Hyack is not saying abolish order. He is saying build order through rules, not commands. Here Hyack is less metaphysical than Locke and less absolutist than Spooner, but he still sees private property as essential to liberty. Why? Because property gives individuals an independent, protected sphere from which they can make plans, bear consequences, experiment, and act without needing continuous permission. Property decentralizes power and makes real choice possible. Without it, freedom becomes rhetorical because all meaningful decisions depend on access controlled by others. This follows directly from his emphasis on coercion, personal plans, and independent domains of action. Property is the material basis of independence. Without private property, individuality loses its footing in the real world. Money also matters here. For Hyack, money prices are not merely instruments of payment. They are indispensable signals that allow decentralized coordination. So money is not just stored labor in a Lockean moral sense. In Hyack, it is also stored informational structure, a way society communicates relative scarcities and possibilities. Locke says property is labor embodied. Spooner says property is self-ownership made durable. Hyack says property and prices are the framework that makes free coordination possible. How does this interact with socialism? Hyack's objection to socialism is not just that it infringes rights. It is that socialism assumes away the central fact of social life, dispersed knowledge. A planned economy cannot rationally allocate resources because the relevant knowledge is not available in one place. And once the state tries to force outcomes anyway, it must expand coercion and abandon neutral rules. So knowledge is dispersed. People pursue unknown and changing ends. Institutions should use general rules. Markets coordinate without central omniscience. Equal law matters more than equalized outcomes. Coercion should be minimized. Socialist tendency, broadly speaking, believes that distribution is treated as a conscious moral task. Planners or political bodies are asked to direct production and allocation. Equality of outcome or social justice becomes a policy objective, and that discretion expands because outcomes must be constantly adjusted. Hayek thinks that road is both epistemically impossible and politically dangerous. Socialism fails not just because it is unjust, but because it asks human rulers to perform an impossible intellectual task and then hands them coercive power when they fail. That is the heart of it. What he would not endorse is absolute freedom in the sense of no rules, anarchism, the abolition of government, unlimited private coercion, legal chaos, the idea that every welfare measure is automatically tyranny, and that the idea that liberty means indifference to poverty or incapacity. He would also reject the thought that society can function without inherited rules, evolved institutions, and impersonal legal order. He is a liberal, but not a pure voluntarist in the Spooner sense. He thinks civilization rests on frameworks we did not invent from scratch and cannot intelligently replace wholesale. Hayek's revolution is to defend liberty not only as a moral demand, but as the practical condition for a complex civilization, because knowledge is dispersed among millions of individuals and never given to any one mind. No planner can successfully direct society from above. A free order therefore depends on private property, contract, prices, and general rules of law that reduce coercion and let people coordinate through their own plans. Freedom is not chaos. It is the condition in which persons are not forced to serve another's purposes, and in which society can use knowledge that no ruler could ever possess. For most political thinkers, the biggest question was who should rule. Hayek asks a different question. Who could possibly know enough to rule a whole society? His answer is devastating. Nobody. The main argument is that the facts that matter in society are scattered across millions of minds. No planner possesses them all. That is why markets, prices, property, and free choice are not optional ideological extras. They are the mechanisms by which civilization uses knowledge it does not centrally possess. Freedom is therefore not only morally superior, it is functionally necessary. This is not an argument against order. Hayek is not against law or government. He is against arbitrary direction. Liberty means known general rules, equal law, and institutions that keep coercion impersonal and limited. Socialism assumes society can be consciously arranged toward just outcomes. Hayek says that is the fatal conceit. No committee can know enough to allocate life from above, and when it tries, it must replace neutral rules with political favoritism, compulsion, and control. Hayek allows a minimum floor of security, but security must remain compatible with liberty. The moment it becomes a warrant to direct particular outcomes for particular people, freedom starts turning into administration. Hayek's message is that freedom is not merely a noble sentiment. It is the operating system of a society too complex for anyone to command, where Hyack and Locke largely align. 1. The individual is prior to the political machine. Both reject the view that the person exists for the state. Government is justified only insofar as it secures a framework within which persons may live their own lives. Hayek is less natural rights in style, but he is still defending the individual against political subordination. 2. Freedom is not anarchy. Both believe liberty is compatible with law, and in fact requires law. The key is that law must restrain arbitrary power rather than become an instrument of it. 3. Government is limited by purpose. Neither thinks government exists to manufacture the good life directly. Its role is protective and framework setting, not total management. 4. Property matters to liberty. Both see private property as deeply connected to freedom, independence, and the ability to act without begging leave from rulers. 5. Arbitrary power is the enemy. Locke calls it tyranny. Hayek emphasizes coercion and arbitrary government. Different vocabulary, same central target. Where Hayek and Locke largely differ: 1. Locke is rights first. Hayek is order and knowledge first. Locke starts with natural rights and consent. Hayek often starts with coercion, spontaneous order, and the knowledge problem. Locke asks what legitimizes rule. Hayek asks what institutional order lets free civilization function. 2. Locke is more contractarian. Hayek is much less interested in founding politics on an original contract story. He is more evolutionary and institutional. He cares more about inherited legal traditions and evolved orders than about a hypothetical founding act. 3. Hayek is less absolute about property in metaphysical terms. Locke links property directly to labor and personhood. Hayek defends property more as a practical condition of liberty, independence, and social coordination. 4. Hayek is more open to a minimal social floor. He explicitly allows some minimum sustenance and social insurance in ways many readers of Locke would treat as a later liberal development, rather than a Lockean first principle. Where Hyack and Spooner largely align. 1. Both are suspicious of concentrated power. Both see coercive, centralized authority as a standing threat to the individual. 2. Both treat the individual as more than raw material for collective purposes. Each, in his own way, rejects the idea that people may be managed like parts in a machine. 3. Both are hostile to socialism. Both think collectivist control swallows liberty. Spooner attacks it morally through self-ownership. Hayek attacks it morally and epistemically through coercion and the knowledge problem. 4. Both distrust the moral inflation of politics. Neither thinks a majority or institution becomes, just by calling its actions public-minded. Where Hayek and Spooner largely differ. 1. Hayek is not an anarchist. This is the big one. Spooner keeps asking whether the state has any rightful authority at all. Hayek clearly thinks a limited state, rule of law, courts, and public institutions are necessary for liberty. 2. Hayek is less consent-centered. Spooner obsesses over actual consent. Hayek is far less interested in that issue, and much more interested in whether institutions generate a free and non-arbitrary order. 3. Hayek is more evolutionary, less absolutist. Spooner's liberalism is morally sharper and more uncompromising. Hayek is more historically grounded, more willing to preserve evolved institutions, and more open to limited welfare provisions. 4. Spooner sees coercion mainly as a rights violation. Hayek also sees it as a knowledge-destroying mechanism. That is Hayek's distinctive contribution. Central control is wrong not just because it invades the person, but because it wrecks the informational processes by which society learns and coordinates. Locke says that rights come before government. Spooner says, prove government has real consent. Hayek says, even if power means well, it still cannot know enough to run a free civilization. Locke places the individual above the ruler. Spooner places the individual above the state's claims. Hayek places the individual inside a spontaneous order that no ruler can replace without destroying both liberty and knowledge. Congratulations for making it to the end like a boss.